I never told Marcus the truth while his mother was alive. That was the agreement, and I kept it the way I keep most things, quietly with both hands and without complaint. He's 63 years old now, retired, has grandchildren of his own, and every Sunday he calls me at 2 in the afternoon without fail, and he calls me Mama, and I answer to it the way I've answered to it since he was 4 months old, and didn't know the difference between me and anyone else in this world. I know the difference. I've always known. It was 1958 when my sister Leola showed up at my door in Piedmont with a baby wrapped in a dish towel and a cardboard suitcase that didn't close all the way. She was 21. She had come from Charlotte on a Greyhound bus, and she smelled like cigarettes and something I didn't want to name. My husband Calvin was working the night shift at the mill. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my Deddle, the silver one with the little dent on the right side, the one our grandmother had left me, and I was mending a pair of trousers by lamplight when she knocked. She didn't say much that first night. She put the baby on my kitchen table the way you set down a bag of flour. She said his name was Marcus. She said she couldn't do it. She didn't cry. Leola never cried in front of people. That was a thing we shared, she and I. I picked him up. He was warm and heavier than he looked, and he grabbed my finger without even opening his eyes, just grabbed it and held on. That was the night I understood that some decisions aren't made with your mind. I didn't tell Calvin until the following morning. I want to be honest about that. I let him sleep, and I fed that baby with formula I'd heated on the stove. And by the time Calvin came through the door at 6:15, with mill dust still in his eyebrows, I had already made up my mind about a thing I hadn't consulted him on. He sat down at the table. He looked at the baby. He looked at me. He said, "Dorothy, what is this?" I said, "This is Marcus, Leola's boy, and I think we ought to keep him." Calvin was not a complicated man, but he was a decent one. He sat with it for a long time, drank his coffee, set the cup down with both hands like it was something fragile. He said, "All right." That was all right. 2 words and we became parents. We never went to a courthouse. This was Piedmont, North Carolina in 1958, and certain arrangements between colored families were handled in certain ways, and the less paper involved, the fewer questions asked by people who were not owed answers. Leola signed what needed signing in front of Reverend Hobbs, and that was that. Marcus was a serious child. Quiet in the way some children are quiet. Not shy, just watchful. He had Leola's forehead, and her way of tilting his head before he spoke. And sometimes when he did that, I felt something move through me that I couldn't call grief and couldn't call joy. I raised him the way I knew, with work and church and clear expectations. I taught him to press his own shirts by the time he was 9. I sat with him at that same kitchen table while he did his arithmetic, and when he got it wrong, I made him do it again. And when he got it right, I didn't make a fuss because getting it right was what was expected. Leola came to visit. Not often. Once a year at Christmas, sometimes Easter. She'd bring a gift that was always slightly wrong for his age. A toy for a younger child, a book too advanced. And she'd watch him from across the room with an expression I recognized. Marcus thought she was his aunt. For a long time, that's all she was to him. He never asked why he didn't look like Calvin. Children don't always ask the obvious things. They ask the things that worry them. And what worried Marcus was whether he'd make the football team, and whether Sandra Reeves liked him, and whether he'd get into the vocational program at school. Not where he came from. He trusted where he was. Calvin died in 1974. Heart. Marcus was 16. He took it hard and he took it quietly, the way men in our family are taught to take things. And I watched him carry that weight and I thought, Calvin gave you 16 years of being your father. That was real. That counted. I went on alone, kept the mending business going. Marcus finished school, went to work, married a woman named Patricia, who I liked immediately and told him so, which I did not do with everything in his life. He bought a house 12 minutes from mine. 12 minutes. He measured it. And I kept the deddle on my windowsill. Didn't use it anymore, hands too stiff. But I kept it there. The little dent on the right side catching light in the morning. There were times I almost told him. I want to be truthful about that too. There were moments, a Sunday dinner, a quiet evening when Patricia had taken the kids somewhere, when the words were right there, when I thought, he's old enough, he's settled, he could hold it. I didn't say them. Not because I was afraid of what he'd think of me. I was afraid of what he'd think of Leola. She had her troubles, and she had her reasons, and she had spent 40 years being his aunt and bringing gifts that were never quite right, and whatever complicated thing lived inside her chest when she looked at her son, that was hers. I wasn't going to take it from her and hand it to Marcus like a problem he hadn't asked for. Leola died in 2004. Cancer. Took about 4 months. In the last week she asked me to come to Charlotte. I drove myself. I was 70 years old, and I drove myself to Charlotte, and I sat by her bed and she held my hand. She was very small by then, nothing like the woman who'd arrived at my door with a baby in a dish towel. And she said, "You were a better mother than I would have been." I said, "You don't know that." She said, "Dorothy, I know that." I didn't argue. You don't argue with a woman who's leaving. She asked me if I was going to tell him. I said I didn't know. She said, "Do what you think is right. You always have." I told Marcus on a Sunday in 2006, 2 years after Leola passed. We were sitting at my kitchen table, the same table, different chairs, same light coming through the same window, and he had brought me a bag of the butter cookies I like, and he was telling me something about his youngest grandchild, and I just said it. I said, "Marcus, there's something I've needed to tell you for a long time." He went still. He looked at me, tilted his head the way he always had. I told him plainly, his mother, the bus from Charlotte, the dish towel, Calvin saying, "All right." He didn't speak for a while. I let the silence be what it was. Then he said, "Did Daddy know from the start?" I said he had. He nodded. He looked at the window. He said, "That sounds like him." That was it. That was the whole thing. He stayed for supper. He called me Mama when he left. He called me the following Sunday at 2 in the afternoon. I have the deedle on the windowsill still. Silver, a little dented on the right side. Some mornings the light hits it just so, and I think of that night in 1958, the lamp, the trousers half mended, the knock at the door. I was 23 years old, and I didn't know anything about what I was agreeing to. That's the truth. I thought I understood love. I thought I knew what it cost. I didn't know yet. I learned. There are people who will tell you that blood is the whole story. They're wrong. Blood is just where the story starts. What happens after that? Who stays? Who shows up? Who sits at the table and does the work? That's the story. I'm 91 years old. I've buried my husband and my sister and more friends than I can count without getting tired. I have one son. He calls me every Sunday. That's enough. That has always been enough.